Chapter 2, A Visit from the Imperial Princess, Part 2. Since ancient times, there hasn't been a way to make people stop talking. This was especially true when it came to the sensational topic of the Crown Prince's betrothal. It was major enough to spread like wildfire, following talk about Natra's victory, from the palace to the town at the snap of a finger. Most people welcomed it with open arms as a stroke of good fortune in their alliance with the Empire, enhancing their favorable perception of wine. Our alliance with the Empire is gonna be rock solid. I'm certain this will put the ill king at ease. I wonder what their child's name will be. Ha ha ha, don't get carried away. The marriage hadn't even been officially announced, but the townspeople were already on the verge of celebration. And this conversation was on the rational side of things to boot, especially since no one in this country knew the appearance of this imperial princess. Naturally, that meant she was the subject of a host of speculations and dramatizations. Rumors flew across town. The tamer ones were about how the princess's voice was more beautiful than any jewel, her looks more stunning than the gods. The wilder ones guessed that the princess and prince had a past while he was studying in the Empire and had rendezvoused in secret. It was all nonsense, of course, but Wine didn't want to rain on their parade, so he gave orders to leave the matter be. Even Ninim found no reason to object. And object she didn't, but the situation had changed lately. It wasn't the townspeople, but those in the palace who had taken things in an odd direction. Ninim was the reason for this change. After all, it was the undeniable truth that Wine had relied on Ninim heavily. As the aide of the crown prince, everyone in the palace assumed her to be his favorite concubine. Which is why they began to question, what would become of her once Wine was married? Will she run from the palace in despair? No way. To think Our Lady would leave his side, but the imperial princess may not forgive him for keeping a mistress, depending on her disposition, and she could even try to push Lady Ninim away. This is his aide we're talking about. I'd like to think the princess won't be able to do anything rash. These hushed whispers making their rounds through the palace were the reason Ninim looked troubled. She was considering how to approach it while still dealing with government affairs, but... What do you make of the situation, Lady Ninim? Really? Are you seriously asking me this to my face? Upon closing their discussion with the Empire, Ninim was catching her breath in the hallway when a few young ladies of the court caught up to her. Of course I am. Everyone is curious, after all. That's right. The love triangle between His Highness, the Imperial Princess, and Lady Ninim is too irresistible to pass up. I don't recall being in a love triangle. How exaggerated had the rumors gotten? With astonishment and confusion, Ninim replied, I shall make it known that I have no intention of leaving the palace. I am certain whoever His Highness's betrothed will be, she and I will get along well. These were her true feelings. After all, she confronted a mountain of political challenges that stacked up against her on a daily basis. How could winning over a sheltered princess possibly be any more difficult? Now that I have made this clear, let others know and do not allow these strange rumors to spread any further. It is difficult to say how His Highness would feel if they were to reach his ears. This was what made Ninim nervous. She didn't particularly care about the rumors about her. But Wine was human, too, meaning he could unleash his wrath if provoked. There was a decent chance that the whispers circulating throughout the palace could set him off. Tish, fine. You're no fun, Lady Ninim. Now. What did you expect? Ninim sighed internally at the court ladies, who reluctantly obeyed her wishes. As a frequent mediator between Wine and his vassals, she was aware of her position and treatment of others. To those who were revered, she was as polite as possible. To those receptive to her brutal honesty, she was more casual. Her relationship with the ladies of the court was harmonious for the most part, but she regretted not taking on a more commanding and cool presence in this situation. That said, it was difficult to please everybody. Ninim quickly changed the subject. Well, I'll be returning to work. Let me repeat that you should avoid invoking His Highness's wrath. I'm sure you're aware of what happened to those who provoked him in the past. I'll let you know that even I won't be able to stop him. Upon hearing the direct threat, the ladies nodded uncomfortably. With that settled, Ninim turned on her heel conclusively. Now that I've hammered that down, this should quiet down, she thought, half filled with wishful thinking. That said, with their excitement. If Wine's right, and this is a trap without any actual plans of marriage, everyone is going to be bummed out. As she strutted down the hallway, she mulled over his hypothesis in her mind. She knew the depth of his prudence. A glimpse at the wisdom in some of his remarks was enough to send a chill down her spine and remind her not to take them lightly. At the same time, she wondered in her heart if calling it a trap was taking things too far. Even Wine had said he was unsure of the Empire's true motive. But if Wine is mistaken, and it really is someone's ploy to strengthen their faction, then just as he'd told his vassals, he would marry the princess without fail. It was all political. She understood that. He was a member of Natra's royal family, which meant he could never take a woman without wealth and status as his wife. Ninim slapped her cheeks lightly. "I'd better get back to Wine." She quickened her pace down the hallway toward the office, exchanging pleasantries and chatting briefly with the occasional vassal or guard, when Ninim. A stern voice called out from behind her. Ninim stopped and turned on her heels. Not many in the palace called her by her first name alone. There was the king, Prince Wine, his younger sister Felania, and Master Levon. She bowed deeply as she addressed him. Levon had a stiffness about him that was obvious at a glance. His features were severe, order and discipline were evident in his gait, and he gave off an impression of forged steel. But more unique were his hair and eyes, which were white and red, respectively. In other words, he was a Flom, just like Ninim. "We can walk and chat at the same time. Do you have a minute?" he asked. Of course. Could this concern the proposed marriage? Naturally. The two spoke as they walked side by side down the hallway. "News has reached the ears of His Royal Majesty. He wishes to know the details. If that were the case, I would have gladly come if called upon." Levon snorted. I can't ask anything unreasonable of the next family head." Ninim chuckled wryly. "Says the current head, Master Levon. Since ancient times, the Flom had been persecuted across the continent, particularly in the west. Those who had settled in the kingdom of Natra after wandering through many lands were only a subgroup. The king at the time had accepted the oppressed Flom and welcomed their deep insight from a life of traveling the continent. Among them was the leader of their people, a Flom named Rayleigh, who had been in the king's favor and served as his lifelong aide. From then on, a successive line of talented Flom descendants had been appointed to new generations of kings. 3 traditions were born in the process. First, the Flom were to be carefully selected by the royal family to serve as their aides. Second, those Flom would be given the surname of Rayleigh. And finally, the aide to the one who ascended to the throne would become the head of the Flom. Levon Rayleigh had served as the aide to the current king, which meant he was the current head of the Flom living in Natra. And how's that discussion actually going? In terms of the reports of the emissary, the offer appears legitimate. The Imperial Princess Lowelmina herself will visit Natra before the official discussions. Oh my. I guess it's not a joke. But His Highness believes something else may be going on. Have you heard any reports on Princess Lowelmina from subordinates? As with other countries, Natra had a network of spies. But it was special in having a second network spread across the continent via the diasporic Flom. Levon had once managed it, but that duty was now left to Ninim. Nothing of substance. The princess usually shuts herself away in the palace, but she's appeared at ceremonies and soirees on occasion. But no information has proved especially useful. She shook her head. With the political fighting among the 3 imperial princes causing chaos, the reports say more research into the princess will take time. I see. I have to wonder if someone urged this sheltered girl into marriage. Do you think someone is pulling the strings behind the princess? That's what I'm inclined to think. Well, it might be different if His Highness and the princess are already acquainted with one another. Are they? Ninim shook her head. No. It would seem that way from the rumors, but in reality, Wine and Ninim were essentially 2 peas in a pod, coordinating constantly. This had been true even while he was studying abroad in the Empire. Of course, there were times when they worked separately, but it was impossible to think that he could have met and become familiar with the princess in these short bursts of time. Plus, Wine himself said he didn't know her. I see. And he hasn't turned down the offer yet, right? Yes, that's correct. He intends to follow through with it. Then all is well. It would be a disaster if he angered them because he didn't feel like it. As she'd expected, other people were under the impression that Wine couldn't turn it down. They saw nothing odd about that. Wine's words about Natra getting lured by the Empire crossed the back of her mind. I wonder if there's another motive here, as Wine suspects. As she considered this, Levon continued as if delivering a soliloquy. But I'm certain His Highness understands that would be an impossible undertaking, especially being who he is. Even at a young age, he controls his own emotions and excels at seeing the whole picture. Looking at His Royal Majesty and His Highness makes it clear our royal family comes from a truly monstrous lineage. Ninim paused her thoughts and frowned. Master Levon, I don't think I would go as far as calling them monsters. I'm not wrong. Levon's tone was surprisingly brusque. He stopped in place. A beat passed before Ninim turned to look back at him. He had a far-off expression. It's been about 200 years since the founding of the Kingdom of Natra. His Royal Majesty is the 14th king, and he has been wise and great since his youth, as has Wine. But it's impossible for a royal family to maintain the authority necessary to run a nation for this many generations. It was true. Even if someone flipped back through the entire history of the continent, there weren't many countries that had lasted as long as Natra. Those with an iota of wisdom and a succession of kings who were proactive in leading the nation numbered even fewer. In most cases, kings from long dynasties had no interest in politics and were liable to sink into hedonistic self-indulgence. Their authority and political might would weaken, and at last be eaten alive by the beast known as ruin. Power corrupts people. The first generation that builds the country with blood and sweat can withstand that temptation. The first and second generations have a sense of discipline. But then they hit a roadblock. If the nation becomes solid as a rock, past hardship becomes history, and all the sweat and blood is wiped away. They become a long line of nobility and royalty who lack any awareness of pain or anguish. Levon gave a heavy sigh. They have no knowledge or experience of fighting for something. Everything has been handed to them on a silver platter from a young age. And during their developmental stages, when they're still not in control of their emotions and egos, they hear others tell them, "You're special," and "You're of noble birth," like a curse. You're saying it's natural for rulers to become twisted? That's right. To be perfectly honest, even royalty are human. It makes sense that they would grow warped. It's odder to have authority and not abuse it. This was what made Wine and his family monstrous. To not become warped, extravagant, or lax. Levon was commenting on the ability of the long line of royals that continued to carry out their duties honorably as if it were a matter of course. Considering even the founding King Selima had an unorthodox past himself. Yes, perhaps it was passed down in the blood. Our ancestor Rayleigh had a keen eye in choosing Natra. By supporting this nation, I'm certain our wish will one day be. Master Levon. Ninim interrupted the growing passion in Levon's words. He got a hold of himself and issued a slight cough, catching his breath. In any case, I now understand the situation. I've taken up much of your time. I'll be returning to His Royal Majesty. The current king was recuperating from an illness away from the palace, and his care had been entrusted to Levon. Because of that, both had rarely made any appearances recently. I understand he's busy, but please tell Prince Wine to visit sometime soon. We can get Princess Felania to visit him almost every day, but His Royal Majesty wishes to see his son on occasion. I understand. Good day. Levon turned on his heel and left to return to the king's side. As she watched him leave, Ninim gave a single grievous sigh. You're finally done talking. Ack. Ninim physically leaped into the air at the sudden voice behind her. She turned around to face the surprised newcomer, a boy around her age, maybe a little younger. He didn't have much of a presence, but he did have white hair and red eyes, indicating he was another Flum. You're too inattentive, Ninim. And to think you're supposed to also serve as Wine's guard. I would have noticed if it wasn't you. Ninim steadied her racing breath. And, Nanaki, stop calling him Wine where other people can hear. We're the only ones around. Your pride will get you in trouble. Jeez, Ninim. As annoying as ever. You. Never mind, just forget it. Upon realizing they were getting nowhere fast, Ninim squashed down her true feeling as her cheeks twitched slightly. Well, what do you want? Something you can't say in front of Master Levon. No, I just didn't say anything earlier because I don't like dealing with him. Well, what is it? I want you to see Falania. Princess Falania? Ninim blinked back. Falania Elk Arbalest, the crown princess for the kingdom of Natra. With a cheerful and kind-hearted disposition, she was 2 years younger than Wine and beloved by everyone in the palace. And this boy in front of Ninim, Nanaki Ralei, was the flum chosen to serve as her guard. Come to think of it, I've been so busy that I haven't been able to see her lately. Did she ask you to call for me? No, Nanaki shook his head. I'm not sure why, but she's been bummed out lately. Holly said it'd be good for her to see you. Holly was the chamberlain who primarily cared for Falania, and she was excellent at picking up on people's emotional states, unlike Nanaki. Ninim considered for a minute why Holly might call her before coming to a conclusion. I see, so that's it. She looked at Nanaki. Where is Princess Falania now? This is around the time when she studies in her room. Come on. Let's get going. Ninim and Nanaki made their way to the princess's room. The temperate climate of the area surrounding Wiles Lake in the southeastern part of the continent has blessed it with fertile lands, causing it to change hands often since ancient times due to conflict. A hoarse voice droned on through the room. This fighting was put to an end 60 years ago when a country with enough military might to suppress the entire region was formed. That country became known as Earthworld. The owner of the voice was an elderly man named Claudius. Originally a jurist from the West, he was a wise scholar who had also been Wine's childhood instructor. He'd grown more skilled and aware of justice in his old age. But since he had no fear of criticizing even the royals and nobility that he judged as evil, most of his life had been spent receiving invitations from those of influence, only to be driven out once he incurred their wrath. More than one assassin had gone after him. But this man wasn't only intelligent, he was a top-notch swordsman. He continued to turn the tables on his attackers until he finally arrived in Natra. And, because Natra suited either him or his old age, he quit his antagonizing ways and took up a career of educating children. But their attempt to forcibly suppress other countries resulted in bloodshed, leaving disorder and chaos in its wake. To prevent these countries and their tribes from revolting, the empire chose to use force and military power to establish its strength domestically and abroad. On the receiving end of this lecture was a girl with a baby face. Her name was Falania Elk Arbalest, with a middle name reflecting that of King Alkrad, who led the resurgence of the Kingdom of Natra. She was the nation's crown princess. The empire absorbed nations big and small, with the most notable ones being Burnock, Codlify, Fufert, and Todrelin. Also the Garin state, which shares an eastern border with Natra and was originally known as the Kingdom of Ankadal. But unlike the other nations, when the sovereign was offered vassalage, Claudius brought his lecture to a sudden halt. With a small sigh, he warned with a piercing voice, Princess Falania. Wahaha! Bang! Hitting the desk, Falania snapped her head up in a panic and straightened her posture as if she'd been paying the utmost attention to his lesson the entire time. But Claudius had seen this same trick hundreds of thousands of times. It seems that your mind is elsewhere today. Ack. I'm sorry, she apologized, instead of making up an excuse. She was pure of heart. But as the royal tutor, Claudius had to dish out the brutal truth. As royalty, you must remember that your words and actions are inherently political. Haven't I taught you not to apologize so easily? Yes, of course. I remember. Very good. There's no need to be formal with me, but until you can separate your public and private spheres, you must put on your best face even with me to familiarize yourself with appropriate behavior. I understand. Thank you, Claudius. The elderly man smiled. All right. Let's stop here for today. What? But it's pointless to try to learn if you're not in the mood to listen, Your Highness. If you're concerned about cutting our session short, I advise you to try to resolve whatever is on your mind before our next lesson. Claudius looked past Falania. Perfect timing. A guide has come to lead the way. When she turned around, Falania saw Ninim standing in front of the door. I'll leave the rest to our esteemed aide. Good day, Your Highness. Claudius gathered his materials and excused himself from the room. Ninim approached Philania and kneeled. Princess Philania, I received word that a shadow has been cast over your heart. I've come to pay you an overdue visit. Ninim. I understand. Am I right to assume it concerns Prince Wine's marriage? Ninim speculated. Philania nodded. I knew it, the aide mentally noted. It was no secret that Philania revered her brother, to the point that she'd become dispirited when he'd studied abroad in the Empire. Now faced with the possibility of an upcoming marriage, Philania was worried he might leave her side and go far away. No need for concern, Princess Philania. Even if His Highness chooses to marry, there is no way he'd leave the country. After all, he is the Crown Prince of Natra. Ninim didn't realize that Philania had stopped responding until she was done talking. Princess Philania? I know he'll stay here even if he gets married, but I doubt things will ever be the same, she admitted in a strained voice. It's like, right as I managed to wrap my head around father being ill and Wine becoming the regent, there's this new possibility that he's going to get married. Philania lowered her gaze, staring fixedly at her fingers. Her eyes reflected two small hands holding nothing at all. It feels like everything is changing, and I'm the only one being left behind. Philania wasn't playing the victim or being paranoid. In fact, the kingdom of Natra was opening itself to the possibility of a revolution, with Wine as its epicenter. Philania couldn't be the only one who felt lonely and anxious about this situation. Ninim knew Philania didn't need to be persuaded, and she called upon her own heart to answer her. You're right. Our country is undergoing great change. Even I'd drown in this raging torrent if I lose focus. Ninim clasped her hands over the princess's fingers. But it's not like everything is going to be different. We all have things that remain constant in our lives, no matter what. Like, Ninim beamed. Like, how you and the prince hold each other very dear. With an assertion this forward, Philania couldn't hold herself back from blushing, which warmed the aide's heart. Let's say this courtship leads to Prince Wine forming a union. Even then, he'd never neglect you, Princess Philania. I think you are just as precious to him as he is to you. Don't you believe in Prince Wine? I want to, but I have my doubts. Is that strange? No, not at all. And I know how to resolve them. Ninim took her hand. Let's pay the prince a visit to share your anxieties and talk it out. What you need more than anything is time together with him. I'm worried I'll get in his way. If I may borrow his words, any big brother who thinks his little sister is a bother is a failure of a sibling. Well then, urged on by Ninim, Philania stood up timidly and shyly spoke to Ninim as if she were a younger sister asking to get spoiled. Will you come with me, Ninim? Of course. Ninim smiled gently and set out alongside the princess.